When I started browsing the Gilmore Girls subreddit for the first time, I was surprised to see that there was one question that just kept popping up over and over again, and that question was Mitchum right? And because there's just one of me, I'm going to try to argue both sides. So I'll argue, yes, he was right, and no, he was wrong. And I have my own opinions, of course, but I will try to be as persuasive as possible. In the interest of fairness, we'll see if I succeed. And I'm sure that everybody is familiar with this scenario, but just to give a brief recap. Rory is invited to dinner with the Huntsbergers. At dinner, Logan's family, namely his grandfather and his mother, imply to Rory that she doesn't have the pedigree to be part of their family.
A girl like Rory has no idea what it takes to be in this family, Logan.
Oh my God.
She wasn't raised that way. She wasn't bred for it. And this isn't at all about her mother.
Rory naturally is very upset. Then Logan's father, Mitchum, comes in. He has no idea what's going on, and they leave without telling him. The following day, Mitchum shows up at the Yale newspaper to apologize to Rory. He says, "Listen, my family was terrible. I'm sorry for the way that they treated you. Would you like an internship? Would you like to shadow me?" And Rory says, "No, thank you, because this is a pity internship. She doesn't want this internship because it's not based on her ability, but because he feels bad." And Mitchum says,
"This is still an opportunity. Who cares why you got the opportunity? It's here. And life is about making the most of everything you're handed."
so she says, "Okay, I'll take it." Then we see that she's super excited. She researches Mitchum. She is super excited for the first day of work. She's super nervous. She's completely lost on her first day. We see that she doesn't know what's going on. She's following Mitchum and she doesn't know what her responsibilities are. She tells Logan that she feels lost. She really wants to impress him. The next episode, we see that Rory is in more of a groove. She kind of knows people's names. She's running around, handing things off. She's busy working, doing stuff. It's not clear what her job is. She does seem to be more in an assistant role, but she's also shadowing Mitchum at the same time. Then we see that Rory sits in on a meeting with Mitchum, and at the end of the meeting, Mitchum tells Rory,
And I have to tell you, you don't got it.
Rory is completely broken. She steals a yacht that same night, and then she drops out of Yale. So this raises the question, was Mitchum right in saying that Rory doesn't have what it takes? And I think that this scenario can be broken down to different elements, which is what makes it so interesting, because we could first look at, was Mitchum accurate? Was he correct in saying that Rory doesn't have the drive, the ability to be a journalist? The other element to this is Mitchum's intention. What was his intention in giving this feedback? Was he trying to be helpful? Was he being genuine? Or was he trying to bring her down? Because this is a scenario where this is the girlfriend of his son. His intention is relevant, but I will not be addressing it in this video. So I think that it's possible to parse out his accuracy to his intention. We can imagine a circumstance where he's being genuine, but he's also wrong, or he's being genuine and he's right, or he's being malicious, but he's also right. So we could see 4 different scenarios from this. And because of that, I will separate it from this video. And I think that Mitchum is really interesting as a character, and I want to analyze him separately. The other component is, was Mitchum right in the way that he gave his feedback? Because some people feel that even though Mitchum was right in his assessment, he wasn't right in how he said it. And then finally, the other element is, was Rory's reaction reasonable to Mitchum's feedback? And I don't want to get into how reasonable Rory was. I mean, I don't think she was reasonable in stealing a yacht, but I don't want to get into it. It is relevant to one of the arguments, however, so I will have to address it in the context of, was Mitchum right? So let's get into it. Yes, Mitchum was right. Mitchum is a seasoned professional. I mean, he's a newspaper mogul in this universe of Gilmore Girls. And after a period of time, you develop a gut feeling on people. I mean, he's worked with hundreds of reporters, and people from all different industries have sort of developed this understanding of when someone has an ability. And Mitchum, who has had decades of experience, would have that ability. The other point is that we do see throughout the show that Rory does lack abilities. So focusing on the internship itself, we see that in that meeting, she does not speak up, which is what Mitchum notes. And yes, she is an intern and everyone else is an employee, but in that discussion, he encourages everybody to talk, which is what he points out. And while everyone is speaking, he does glance back at Rory a few times. And there's a point where he even tees up, prepares sort of a scenario for her where she could pitch in.
We don't even have office space for extra people, let alone the budget. Go to universities, Yale, wherever, get volunteers to pick up what our staff can't cover.
He took that as a sign that she's not the type of person to speak up. And it's notable to focus on what Mitchum actually says during the feedback. He doesn't say that she has no skills. He doesn't say that she's incompetent. When he says it, what he's referring to is drive. That's what he means by it.
I just don't think you really have the drive to put yourself out there, to be honest. To get a story, to dig.
And when she says that she did everything that she was told, he points out that in life,
it's not always good enough to do just what's asked of you.
Even though she was doing everything that was asked of her, what he was expecting is someone who would go beyond that because this is what the position really requires. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Not every college student would get a chance to shadow someone like Mitchum. So this wasn't just an internship. This was not a learning opportunity. It wasn't there to mentor Rory. This opportunity was there to see if she can take a chance and show what she has. And we see throughout the show that she does not seem to be the type to be daring or to ask questions. We see this come up for the first time when she's talking to Jess. They're driving and he asks her what she wants to do. She says she wants to be a foreign correspondent, and he questions her a little bit. He wonders if she's cut out for it. And rather than automatically say yes, Rory's response is,
I hope it's not a little too rough for me. I've been talking about this forever.
And that's the first inclination that we get from Rory, that perhaps she's not confident in what she wants to do. Perhaps she doesn't quite know if she is cut out for it. So that doubt we see very early on, that she might not have the confidence to go into that field. And we kind of see this in her conversation with Logan at the Life and Death Brigade event. At the event, Logan is trying to convince Rory to jump off the scaffolding, and she doesn't want to participate. She says, "Hey, I'm here to report. That's what I'm here for." And he says,
George Plimpton never participated.
What?
He's best stuff. Put him in the thick of it. Fighting Sugar Ray Robinson, quarterbacking for the Lions, skating for the Bruins.
So he participated.
and so Rory's automatic reaction is not to participate, but to stand on the sideline. Throughout the show, up until this point, we see that Rory is the kind of person who does everything by the book. She is very smart, which is what Mitchum points out, that she's intelligent, she's hardworking. He does not deny the fact that she's very smart and hardworking and that she can write. He just doubts the fact that she has that it factor. When Richard confronts Mitchum and asks about what happened, Mitchum says,
And if she's got what it takes, she'll bounce back.
but we see in Rory's reaction that she crumbled. She got feedback from one person, and based on that feedback, she completely fell apart. She took a very drastic action. She steals a yacht that same day, and then she drops out of Yale. She spent her whole life working up to go to a great university. She spent her whole life working up to be a journalist, and one person's feedback derails her completely. She doesn't take the time to process. She doesn't take the time to take this feedback and then change. She falls apart. And the fact that she took such a drastic action right away from just one individual, and yes, even though Mitchum is very high in this profession and Mitchum is very well respected in this profession, if Rory has a strong conviction as to what she wants to do and she believes that this is what she's wanted to do her entire life, then one person, no matter who they are, would not break her like that. She would at least take the time to ask other people to work on it, to figure it out, but she didn't take the time to process. She fell. And then finally, we see in the revival that Rory does not seem to have what it takes. When we see Rory 10 years later in A Year in the Life, we see that she's floundering. She has 3 cell phones. She's working as a freelancer. We find out that her story for The Atlantic fell through. She is completely broke,
I'm broke.
which means she has been slowly running out of money over time. And as we know, she was supposed to inherit a lot of money from Trix. She might have gotten money from Richard. So if she's run out of all of that money, then how much was she making in the last 10 years of working as a journalist? What are her credentials? We don't really hear much about her accomplishments. We see the fact that she's completely broke, that she has to move back home, that an article fell through, and we see that she tries to get a story for GQ, and she does the story on lines in New York, but she's not really in it. So she goes to interview people on the street and she passes out. So we see that she doesn't seem to have the drive and motivation to do this job, even though she needs to work right now. She's falling asleep on an interview, and she later tells Lorelai
that whole line story thing was so stupid. I just did it because they thought it was interesting. I didn't have a beat on it. I didn't feel it.
Then we see that she's being recruited by a small magazine, Sandy says, and she shows up to the interview completely unprepared. She doesn't have any pitches. She's not able to sell herself to talk about her abilities. So she shows up to this interview completely uninterested and unprepared. So when we see her in A Year in the Life, it does seem like she does not have the drive. It doesn't seem like for the last 10 years that she's been doing something that demonstrates the fact that she has been a good investigative journalist. And it doesn't mean that she had to be the top of the top, that she had to be the best, but we haven't seen evidence in the Year in the Life that she was successful in her field. No, Mitchum was wrong. First of all, Mitchum did not have enough information. This internship was only 2 weeks.
He spent exactly 2 weeks with you, ordering you around, sending you on coffee runs, playing the big shot.
Is it enough to observe someone for 2 weeks and then definitively say whether or not they have it? And I know I mentioned in the beginning that some people have this gut feeling, they develop an intuition, but for something like a profession and for something like starting a new job, where in the beginning, a person is there to learn, to understand what's going on at first, that they have to understand not just the field, but also just that specific office, learn people's names, understand where everything is. And this is her first professional experience. So she was there basically for 10 working days. And in those 10 days, she was supposed to shadow Mitchum. And Mitchum is not a reporter. He's a businessman. Yes, he has worked as a reporter, but at this point, he has been a businessman for a very long time. And who she's shadowing is an executive. She's not shadowing a reporter. The work that he does is not the work that she wants to do. So she's following him around, and he doesn't really get a chance to see if she operates as a reporter. So we don't know if Mitchum gave her any assignments that a reporter would do. And it's kind of unfair to treat an internship as a test if this internship was in fact an apology. So Rory came into this with the expectation that this is an apology internship and a chance for her to see how a newspaper actually works. She came into this not expecting to operate as someone who's going to show herself off, but as someone who wants to learn because she's in the learning process. And so if someone steps into an opportunity with the interest in learning, it seems like it's a slap in the face to then treat it as a test. We also see that she has no idea what her expectations are. So she enters this internship with no communication, with no idea of what she's supposed to be doing, where she's supposed to be going. We see the first day that it's just very cutthroat and no idea what's going on, which is kind of typical for a very first day. So ultimately, is it fair of Mitchum to say after just 2 weeks that someone doesn't have it? We also see throughout the show that Rory is competent. So we see in the beginning that Rory is a good writer. For example, when Rory is working for the Chilton newspaper, we see that she takes a very boring story, the paving of a parking lot, and turns it into a very beautiful piece. And it's so good that the mentor actually points out the fact that Rory did such a fantastic job, even though she was given such a crappy assignment. We also see that she does put herself out there and is put into uncomfortable positions, and then she follows through. So when Paris assigns Rory to do a story on Max Medina, this is after Max Medina and Lorelai break up, Rory has to interview him. And even though it's uncomfortable, she decides to do it. She says, yes, this is for the story. She's not going to let Paris bring her down, and she does it. And when we're talking about the life and death brigade scenario, and when Logan is talking to Rory about participating in things, Rory is participating. She went out there to get the story. This started out when she was doing a story on downloading illegal music. She noticed that this story wasn't working out, so she drops it. She drops a boring story to look for something more interesting, and then she digs. She dug this story up. She got a lead, Logan, and then she followed up with him. She got in on it, and while she's at this event, she's asking around, and while people are not answering her, she's able to find at least one person who's answering her questions, not just Logan, but also the drunk girl. And when Logan is convincing her to jump, I don't think it's crazy for her to say no And yes, an investigative journalist does jump into the thick of things, but should a person be risking their life for something that's stupid? There's a difference between if you're in a war zone and you have to get a very important story that could potentially save lives or expose something critical, but if you're a college student and you're doing a story on a secret society in college, and you know that the scaffolding is built by college students and it was only tested with potatoes, is it worth dying for? I don't know. I think that perhaps this is one of those scenarios where you should not be jumping into the thick of things and you're kind of an idiot if you choose to do so. Everything was fine, but really, I don't think that that's a testament to someone having the drive and motivation. It's a testament to whether or not they have the brains to risk their life. And this is kind of a side note, but also I sometimes question this idea that Rory's an introvert, which, okay, she is an introvert, but I have to sometimes question this principle that she's meek. Because throughout the show, and this is partially because this is the Gilmore Girls universe where everyone is kind of over the top, everyone talks super fast, everyone is loud, everyone does crazy scenarios. And in this universe, Rory is supposed to be the shy one, but she's not quiet how we would expect a quiet person to be.
And for the last time, the name is Rory!
We see her yelling in class when she can't take a test. She does not stay quiet. She has a tantrum in a classroom and she yells at a student. We also see that she gets up during the town hall meeting and gives an entire speech. There are many times when we see Rory doesn't sit back. One example of this is with Paris. When we see that Paris is being a bully, Rory doesn't just take it. She bites back.
1520.
Very good, Miss Gilmore.
Yet another point is that Rory's reaction to Mitchum does not prove that he's right. And like Mitchum says, that if she has what it takes, then she'll bounce back. And that's exactly what she does. Yes, Rory does steal a yacht. Yes, she drops out of Yale. But then, after a semester off, she re-enrolls. She comes back to school. And when the newspaper is floundering, so the Yale newspaper is not going to be published, Rory takes charge. She sees that things are falling apart, things are not going to get published. She takes over. She takes that initiative and she does whatever it takes to get it published, and she does. And because of her leadership position, because of her ownership, because of being sort of a editor-in-chief, even though she wasn't elected, she does that job and she gets it out. Then, because everyone likes her and everyone is impressed with her abilities, she's nominated to be the editor-in-chief, even though, again, she didn't run for that position. But because of her abilities, she's chosen to be the editor-in-chief. And we also see that she takes Mitchum's feedback. So she goes back to the Stanford Gazette, and Mr. Woltz says that,
I know this will shock you, but you're not the first person who couldn't get along with Herr Huntsberger. It's a pretty big club, actually. Ignore him.
should we really listen to Mitchum if Mitchum butts heads with a lot of people? So then we see her show up at the Stanford Gazette and demand a job. She comes with her portfolio. She comes in ready to talk about her abilities, her skills, and she refuses to leave, even though Mr. Woltz says, hey, listen, we just don't have the budget right now. Then she shows up the next day again. And she's there with ideas. She's there with advice. She's there to say that, hey, I am here to work. I know everybody here. I understand how this operates and I have great ideas. And then she shows up again. She even leaves a binder on Mr. Woltz's desk asking if he can look at it. And finally, she gets the job. So she took Mitchum's feedback and she applied it. And she showed that she can be a go-getter. Another thing that's worth noting is that Mitchum himself takes credit for Rory. So 1 year later, Mitchum writes an article and he mentions Rory. He says that he gave her this opportunity and now she's the editor-in-chief of the Yale Daily News. So it seems like Mitchum himself is going back on his own opinion. He's taking credit for the fact that she's doing so well, even though she's doing well in spite of him, not because of him. So I guess when we look at Rory's reaction to Mitchum's feedback, it's worth to look at her entire reaction. She had a temporary setback. His feedback did impact her, and criticism did impact her, which is a natural human response. There is a power imbalance at play here. He is an industry professional. This is someone who she looks up to. And this is the person who she would expect feedback from. It doesn't matter what her mom says, of course, because her mom would be biased, but this is the person that matters. And getting that negative feedback did temporarily set her back, but she bounced back, just like Mitchum said she should if she has what it takes. In the year in the life, as I mentioned, we see that Rory is struggling, but we only get a moment in time. When we see Rory in the revival, she's 32 years old. Not that old. that's not even halfway through her life. We know that she published a New Yorker article, which Look is super proud of her for, but we don't know the past. So she could have been accomplished, and what we're seeing is a rut.
This is a rut. It's temporary.
So what we're seeing here is a moment in time. And the interesting thing about this idea of having drive, motivation, of being a go-getter is that when it comes to drive, drive is not a linear idea, right? A person just doesn't start with drive and just maintain it throughout their life. Motivation and drive kind of works like a squiggle. It waxes and wanes over time. And when we take this question, was Mitchum right? And if we were to look at Rory's life and we were to take a slice of it, so if we were to address this question, looking at Rory when she dropped out of Yale, then one can say, yes, Mitchum was right. She does not have the drive. She dropped out of school. When we look at Rory when she's at Yale and operating as an editor-in-chief, we could say Mitchum was wrong. We see that she's not only working at the newspaper, but she's leading the newspaper. So when we take Rory in a year in the life, when she's 32 and she's hitting a bottom of her career, we could say Mitchum was wrong, but we don't know what happens afterwards. Of course, this is a fictional character, and one can say, well, this is where the show stops, and this is where we can assess Rory. But if we were to look at this in a holistic way, in a broader scheme, and to see, if we were to take Rory as potentially a real person, then at the age of 32, it's not enough to deem her a failure. So why talk about this? It's just a tiny little subplot in a very large show, and why are people so intense when they're arguing their points? And I think that it comes down to something very fundamental, that it's this question of drive and motivation and abilities. And it relates to all of us because it ties into professions and things that we do. And if someone tells you that you don't have it, what does that mean? And should you take them at their word? Can you develop skills over time? If we take a profession like journalism, is it something that a person is born with, or can they develop it over time? Can they grow in it? I think it's also an interesting question because it touches upon how we handle feedback. If we should accept things as they are, if we should take things as constructive criticism. So yeah, I don't have any answers. I just have questions. It's an interesting scenario because it brings up all the different elements. So what do I think? Was Mitchum right? Well,